Welcome to the Construction Hazard Identification webinar. This training has been designed to provide you with the means and methods necessary for identifying and correcting hazards in the construction industry. Having an effective hazard identification process in place can lead you to an injury-free worksite. Upon completion of this training, you'll have a good understanding of the following objectives. You'll know what processes need to be in place to properly identify hazards. You'll have a better understanding of the different hazard categories and how to identify them. And you'll know how to properly control hazards that you've identified. First, let's review the hazard identification process that needs to be developed and implemented on your construction projects. Prior to starting any construction project, a job hazard analysis, or JHA, should be conducted. What is a job hazard analysis? It's a technique for identifying hazards that are associated with the tasks required to complete a construction project. The first step in the JHA process is to break down the job into individual work tasks. The second step is to identify the hazards associated with each work task. The third step is to identify the hazard controls needed for each work task. As an example, we're going to use a city water line installation project. The tasks required would be trenching and excavation, installation of the water line, and backfilling the trench. Some hazards associated with the tasks would be hitting existing utilities or the trench collapsing. The hazard controls we could use would be calling USA, installing a shoring system, and providing trenching and excavation competent persons training. After completing the JHA, it is critical that regular safety inspections are performed to ensure hazard controls are in place during construction. It's important to note that only the known hazards can be identified during the JHA process. Unknown hazards can develop as construction progresses and conditions change. How often should safety inspections be performed? A best practice is for field supervisors to perform daily inspections and management to perform weekly inspections. To maintain compliance with local regulations, JHAs and safety inspections need to be documented and retained. Now that you have a good understanding of the process involved with identifying hazards, let's review the two hazard categories: dangerous behaviors and hazardous conditions. Dangerous behaviors are defined as actions that have a high risk of injury to oneself or others. The most common dangerous behaviors on construction sites are due to rushing, fatigue, and frustration. Rushing occurs when workers feel the pressure to finish projects in a timely manner. Rushing reduces the quality of work and thus increases the odds of making a dangerous mistake. Be cautious of projects thrown together on Fridays or holiday weekends, as rushing accidents tend to happen more frequently around those times. Fatigue causes a lack of productivity and performance. Fatigue occurs most commonly during extreme hot and cold months. Fatigue can have the same effects on a person as being intoxicated, so make sure workers leave on time to prevent overexertion. Frustration most commonly occurs when a company has poor procedures or bad communication. Frustration can also be linked to problems outside of the workplace. Hazardous conditions are defined as conditions likely to cause death or serious personal injury if exposed to such conditions. Potential hazardous conditions that are commonly found on construction sites include elevated falls, trench collapse, scaffold collapse, electric shock, equipment exposures, and repetitive motion. Elevated falls consistently account for the greatest number of fatalities in the construction industry each year. A number of factors are often involved in falls, including unstable work surfaces, misuse or failure to use fall protection equipment, and human error. Trenches collapse when the walls of the trench cave in due to lack of shoring or appropriate protection. Unprotected trenches cause dozens of fatalities and hundreds of injuries each year. Scaffolds collapse when they are not erected or used properly, and they generally lead to fall hazards. Electric shock occurs from contact with power lines, the lack of ground fault protection, the path to ground missing or discontinuous, and improper use of equipment and extension cords. Equipment exposes workers to hazards involved with being struck by the equipment or by the materials that are being transported by the equipment. Equipment failure or improper use can also lead to serious or fatal injuries. Repetitive motion is an injury to the body that is caused by performing the same motion over and over again, thereby straining the body part and leading to potential musculoskeletal disorders. Some common job tasks involving repetitive motion include drilling overhead, installing carpet, lifting heavy sheetrock and masonry bricks, hammering, and roofing. Now that we have a good understanding of the types of hazards found on construction sites, let's discuss the proper methods for controlling hazards. The first consideration is to eliminate the hazard or substitute a less hazardous material or process. An example would be to utilize a water-based paint rather than a solvent-based paint. This control measure minimizes flammable vapors and eliminates health concerns associated with solvent-based paints. When it is not possible to eliminate a hazard, you should apply the following hierarchy of controls. First, engineering controls. Second, administrative controls. And third, personal protective equipment. Engineering controls are physical changes made to the work area or process that effectively minimize a worker's exposure to hazards. An example of an engineering control would be adding a guardrail to an elevated work platform. Administrative controls are changes made to the work procedures. Examples include limiting the time exposure to the hazard, developing work operating procedures, work practices, and safety and health rules that employees must follow to complete the job safely. An example of an administrative control is developing a company policy on safe lifting procedures for loads. Personal protective equipment should be used if the hazard cannot be eliminated or minimized by using an engineering or administrative control. An example would be using a hard hat, gloves, or eye protection. The best practice is to utilize all three of the controls discussed. For example, consider an operation that generates silica dust. The engineering control would be a ventilation system installed to control the dust. The administrative control would be providing employees with training and posting a sign to warn employees of the dangers. Requiring the use of goggles during equipment operation would be the personal protective equipment. Let's summarize what we have learned about hazard identification. We now have a good understanding of the process involved with identifying hazards, the different hazard categories, and how to control hazards. Thank you for your participation and have a safe day.